Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice little break there on the final stretch here before cocktail hour after all of this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Corey Rebello. I'm an account manager for the East Coast Territory in Qt. I'm based out of Santa Clara, California, so it's not too long of a trip to get out here, as I'm sure it could have been for many of you. Up here we have BogDan Vatra. He is going to give you a little speech all about Qt on Android. And so I hope you guys enjoy. And there should be some time for some Q&A at the end as well, time permitting. But without further ado, take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot. So as he said, I'm BogDan Vatra. I'm the original author of Qt on Android port. So that happened in Qt 4 days. And these days, I'm also the maintainer of Qt on Android port. I'm working for KDAB, and today I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful world of Qt on Android. So this speak has three parts. First part, I'm going to show you how to set up the development environment for Android. Then we are going to see how to use Qt Creator to target Android devices. And finally, we are going to discuss about the deployment system and the package signing. By the way, I did the same talk 2 years ago, so if you already see it, you can go to other presentations. Otherwise, you can see it again. So, first thing first, requirements. You need one of these operating systems, Linux, Windows, and Mac. You also need ANT only for Windows and GDK 6 or better. But if you want a painless experience, I do recommend you to use Linux. Me and the Qt company guys that we are working on Qt Creator plugin and also on Qt port, we all are using Linux. That's why it's the most stable platform for development. But it also works on Windows and Mac. Next, there are a few things that you need to install. Of course, you need to install the Qt SDK. You can grab it from Qt.io website. Then you need Android SDK. Even we are building native applications, every single Android application has a small Java part, including those pure native applications for Java. Also, there has an SDK that you need to build it. So there are two choices here. First choice is to download Android Studio, which will download the SDK for you and will download all the tools. Or if you don't want to use Android Studio at all, you can go to the bottom of the page and get just the command line tools. It's on the bottom of the page. Then you also need the NDK. NDK 10e is the recommended version, even if it's older. The new ones has a bug in GCC, which produce buggy debug builds. So I do recommend you to grab the 10e. We are still using GCC. Even now, CLang is the recommended compiler by Google, because CLang produces huge binaries, over 40% larger than GCC, and we can't switch yet to CLang. Then we need to set up everything. So first step is to install the NDK and Android Studio. Again, Android Studio will set up the SDK for you. If you choose just the command line tools, you need to extract it and then run the Android tool and select Android SDK platform tools and Android SDK build tools and an API version greater than API 16. For Linux, you need actually not only for Linux, for all platforms, you need to enable the USB debugging on your device. But for Linux, you also need to set the USB permissions for your account. Then, to check if your device is really seen by your computer, plug the device, on your computer and run ADB devices command line. If you see the device there, then it means everything is set up and you are ready to work on Android. The final step is to fill the Android page in Tools, Options, Settings, Tools, Options, Android Settings page. And here you need to set the JDK, the Android SDK, and Android NDK locations. Also, make sure automatically create kits for Android is checked. Otherwise, we will not create all the kits for you. You see, we'll see later, when you create a new project, you need to select the kit on which you are going to use to build and run that project. If you don't check this, actually this checkbox is already checked. If you uncheck it, we are not create these kits for you. And if you are using Linux or Mac, I also do recommend you to use Gradle instead of Ant. It's much faster, and it's not deprecated. Actually, Ant now is deprecated on Android. But on Windows, the version that we're still using for Qt has some problems. It's losing some files if those files are in very long path. If the path has more than 256 characters, it's losing the files. So it was a problem in Gradle. Okay, so we've seen how to set up everything. Now let's see how to use Qt Creator for Android. I'm going to show you only the Android part, not only the whole Qt Creator. If you want to check the Qt Creator, I think it's a talk about Qt Creator also on tomorrow or today was, I don't know, I don't remember it when. So when you create a new project, just select an Android kit. If you already have a project and you want to add Android support, it's easy. Just open the project perspective from here and add a kit, add an Android kit. Then, to run it, select the Android kit and press Run button. When you press the Run button, this dialog will pop up, and from here you can select the compatible devices. Here it's a list with all incompatible devices. And if you don't have a device, you can click on Create Android Virtual Device. And you can also check always use this device for this architecture, and this dialog will not bother you again. We are going to use the same device from now on. Okay, let's see how to set up an AVD. AVD is the Android Virtual Device. What is an AVD? It's an emulator, not a simulator, so it's not like iOS thing. This actually emulates the entire machine. It's very reliable, so you don't have to worry that checking your application on a platform or on a different API version on an emulator will fail on a real device. No, it's the same Android operating system that runs on a device. It runs also on these emulators. So why we need an emulator? Well, of course, if we don't have a device, we can run on emulator. There are plenty of Android API versions, and we don't want to buy a phone for every Android versions. Same different screen sizes, and different Android platforms like ARM5, ARM7, x86, x86 64, and so on. And when when you press this button, Create Android Virtual Device, this dialog will pop up. Here, please don't change the ABI version because it's set with the proper ABI for the kit you select. There is another way to create AVDs, which gives you more options to set. You can pop up this dialog from Tools, Options, Android page, and here you have Start AVD Manager. It will show you this dialog. I don't know if it's the same on all platforms. On Linux, it's like this, but on Mac, I think it's a little bit different. Anyway, you need to set the AVD name, choose a device and target and so on. But the most important is this option that must be checked. Use host GPU. Without this, all Qt, QML projects will fail to run on this device, because we really need OpenGL, proper OpenGL implementation. And the emulated OpenGL implementation on emulators is not that good. So you need to use the host GPU. And after you press the run button, you need to wait a little bit and enjoy the application on your device. Let's see a few Android-specific settings in Qt Creator. Every single Android application, every single APK has an Android manifest file. Even in your project, you'll not see it, we'll add it for you. But before you publish your application on Android Play Store or any other Android markets out there, you'll need to create one and set a few things. We'll see a little bit later what we are going to set here. So it's required for every Android application, and it's used to register what activity to start, permissions, API minimum and target versions, and many, many other things. After you create the Android manifest file, make sure you add it to your Git repository or whatever source control management you are using. To create an Android manifest file, it's easy. First, you need to open Projects Perspective. Make sure you are on Build tab. Expand Build Android APK. And here you have Create Templates button. It pops up a small wizard. Follow the wizard, and in the end, you'll end up with this dialog. This is the Android manifest editor in Qt Creator, and here we need to set a few things. First thing we need to set is the package name. Package name is very important. It serves as a unique identifier for your application. That's why do not change it after you publish your application. Changing it means you publish another application. Even for you, it's the same. So Android markets, Android, Google Play, and so on, are using the package name for to identify your application. It's a reserved URL like KDAB trading example, so on. Next is the version code and version name. Those are also very important. Version code, it's a numeric value. Version name, it's a visible, user visible string. You can put there 1.0, alpha 2, or whatever. And you need to bump both every time when you do a release. Minimum required SDK. Here, the editor, it's this one. The editor will set the Android min SDK attribute to use SDK element in your Android manifest file. Again, this is very important because it's used by Android markets to filter the visible devices for your application. If a device has a less API version than your minimum target, will not be visible. Your application will not be visible for these devices. And of course, if you are using some features that are not available on those API versions, if you don't set the minimum correctly, the application will crash on those devices. Okay, and also the last one is the application name. The application name, be aware, is not localized by Qt Creator. In order to localize it, to add support for other languages, you need to edit the resources, to add the value in the resources, and set a string like this example. So for German language, the application name is my translated as here. The run field, which is this one, is used when you have projects with multiple targets. You have multiple applications in your project, and you need to choose which one we are going to use to start when the APK will start, when the activity will start. Then, at the end, there are permissions. Here, permissions are very important. They control the access to resources like network, Bluetooth, external storage, microphone, camera, and so on. If you don't set these permissions, Qt will not be able to access these resources. There are two ways to set them. First one is automatically, and we know every single Qt module which permissions it needs, but sometimes there are two more. For instance, the multimedia module needs permissions for microphone, for camera, for video, and so on. But if you want to use Qt multimedia only to play music, you don't need access to microphone or to camera. So you can uncheck the include default permissions and features for Qt models and use Qt Creator to add all the permissions your application really need. Do not add more permissions than you use because you'll scare the users. For instance, I will never install a game that needs permissions to read my contacts. That's something that I don't want. Or, I don't know, weather permissions to need access to microphone. Why? Okay, and this is the final example of Android manifest file. So we set the package name, we set the version code, we have the minimum and the target SDK. The target SDK is used to tell Android, this is the device that I really use to test my application, and do not turn on any features or stuff that they might turn on or turn off for this target. Anyway, for Qt is not really used because we don't use all those Java things that are coming from Android. Qt is using the native part. So we have the application name, and we let the run as it is, and Qt Creator will choose the single target from our project. Sometime you need to edit the Android manifest file manually. For instance, to add a service, an Android service, you need to add it manually. To switch from design mode to source, you just need to click that XML source button here at the top. There are a few Android projects configurations. To go on that page, you need to go to project, to open project perspective, click on build, and then expand build Android APK. And here we have Android libraries. It's an editor for adding here. It's used to add third-party libraries. And this editor actually just sets the Android extra libs in your project files, the Android extra libs variable in your project files. Be aware, don't mix architectures. An x86 library will never run on ARM phones. So you need to build that third-party library for ARM and then add it here. These libraries are automatically loaded by all Qt applications, so you don't need to load it yourself. And the final chapter is deployment system and package signing. Any questions so far? Yes? Yes, starting with 5.8, we added basic implementations for this, but it's not public. It's not a public API. The public API will come in 5.9, where you'll ask at runtime a permission, and then we call back you. Actually, you will register a callback, a Lambda function, and then we call back you and say the user granted or accepted the permissions. But using Qt 5.6, you will set all the permissions that you need, and if the user will disable one of them, Qt will not be able to read the contacts for instance, but it will not crash.
No, but that means I cannot bump up target SDK version. Because in the
You need, yes, you need to set a lower an SDK version. Okay, move on. Deployment system and package signing. Okay, so there are two deployment systems in Qt Creator. First one is using service that installs Qt for you. And another one is to bundle all Qt libraries together with your application binary and data. We're going to see both of them. Ministro service. Ministro service is a service that I created when I started this project, because back then most of the devices had a very limited space, around 100 megabytes. That was the whole device. And the package size was also very limited. But even today, most of the low-end devices don't have too much space, and also the package size, even now it's raised to 250 megabytes. Putting more platforms in the same APK, it's hard when you bundle also Qt libs libraries. Let's see how Ministro service works. So your package, your APK will contain only the application code, only the application binary and the application data. When the application starts, it tries to connect to Ministro service. If it fails, it opens the Android Play for the user and ask the user to install Ministro. Actually, the user will see only Ministro there, so the user will only tap on install Ministro. Then when it managed to connect to Ministro service, it sends a list of dependencies to Ministro. Ministro downloads only the missing ones. Then it replies with a list of things that the Java part needs to load. The Java part of your application, as I said, every single Android application has a small Java part. This Java part loads all the stuff that Ministro replies, and it starts your Qt application. The advantage of using Ministro is that Qt libraries are downloaded only once. It can detect your CPU features and download optimized libraries. For instance, for ARM5, we'll download ARM5 with VFP enabled on if the CPU supports it, and also on ARM7 it downloads the libraries with Neon. It can upgrade Qt libraries without requiring you to rebuild your application and to re-release it. It allows multiple APKs, multi-platform APKs. So, because your application binary is small, it's not, I don't know, 50 megabytes or so. Usually it's small. You can put all the platforms in the single APK, and with a single APK you can target ARM5, ARM7, x86, and so on. Okay, it can be extended to support your own libraries. There are no legal issues using Qt LGPL v2 or v3 because because Qt libraries, LGPL Qt libraries are not coming into your package. They are in Ministro service. And the downside is that people don't find it very user-friendly because this extra step that the user needs to install Ministro. The other way is to bundle Qt libraries in APK. As I said, the APK contains everything it needs to run. Will not bother the user to install another service. You can include your own custom Qt builds, and the Qt libraries are not updated behind your back, because even Ministro updates Qt libraries sometime, never happened until now, but sometime, for instance, when we go from 5.6.1 to 5.6.2, sometime it might happen we can break something and we break also your application. But bundling Qt libraries in your application, you are sure that your application will use the libraries that you are tested. The downside is that, again, the APK is big because all the Qt libraries are big. because of that, you can target more than one platform per APK. You can't use VFP on ARM5 devices, neither Neon on ARM server devices, because not all ARM server devices support this CPU feature. Qt libraries can be shared by multiple applications, of course. You can get automatically Qt libraries, so you can't get security fixes that we release every minor release. And you also need to check if you really can use Qt LGPL v2 and v3, version 2 and version 3, with your application. I think you can, but I'm not a lawyer, so you need to check this. Package signing. Package signing is the last and most important step before you publish your application. In order to sign your package, you need a key store with a certificate or more certificates, and the certificate can be self-signed. So you don't need to pay a certificate company to sign your package with some SSL keys or whatever. To create a certificate, it's easy. You can use Qt Creator for that. Here, you need to fill the key store password, the certificate, things like alias, name, key size, and so on, and names and everything there. After you create the certificate, make sure you back up your key store. If you lose the key store, you lose the ability to upgrade your application. A lot of people are mailing me about this issue. Hey, I lose my key store, what can I do? You can't do nothing. So make sure you back up your key store. Again, as you can see here, the validity is 10,000 days. That's 25 years or more. So it's a long time. You need to keep your key store. Okay. To sign a package, it's very easy in Qt Creator. You just need to select the key store, click on Sign Package, select the certificate, then click on Open Package Location, and if you see this little warning, make sure you are not using a debug and choose a release build. And after you press the build button, Qt Creator will open a file manager for you, and you need to, if you are using Gradle, make sure you copy this to Android Store. And if you are using Gradle, actually this is Ant and this is Gradle. And after you have the package, if you want to double check if it's really verified, you can use the jar signer tool to check it. And if you see this sign, then the package is really signed and you are ready to ship it to your customers. And that's it. Questions? Yes? Yeah.
So I have a question and a comment. First question is it possible to have multiple activities in one Qt mobile app?
Yes, the only restriction is that every single activity must run in its own process. You can't run them in the same process. On Android, you can have multiple activities that are running in the same process, but in Qt, because we need an event loop for each one, we need separate processes.
Okay, and the comment is about the emulator, actually. You said you're using the normal Google ARM emulation, so to say. My experience is that it's really slow, especially if you have some more computation going on and that your computer has to emulate everything. What my comment is, is you could also set it to x86
Yes.
and install the Intel HAXM virtualization, or you use another emulator, for example Genymotion is what I have really good experience with, which is VirtualBox based and it's really fast. This is my comment. Have you experience with that?
Well, I have experience with x86 emulator. Indeed, it's much faster, but with the other ones, no. But if you want to be 100% sure that your application will run on ARM v7 or ARM 5, you really should use an ARM 5 emulator or an ARM 7. Otherwise, you are not. For instance, in Qt 5.7, we don't ship anymore ARM 5 because we found that on some devices, the atomic operation on 64 bits is not working well and is crashing. So that's why I do suggest you to use, at least for the final test.
Yeah, but you will also test it on the real hardware, right? Not
Yeah.
only in emulator.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Welcome.